Nothing on Airbnb is truly set it and forget it, and cancellation policies are no exception, especially in today's changing market. So in this video, I wanted to show you my data points, my methodology, and rationale for how I decide what cancellation policy works best for which kind of listings. And bonus hack, on the second half of the video, I'll be showing you a chart that I made comparing the three main platforms and how their cancellation policies differ. Now let's start with talking about why cancellation policies even matter. When you accept a booking, there is an opportunity cost. For example, if a guest books your house a few months in advance, but they cancel just 2 days before, then essentially you only have those 2 days to fill that booking. And chances are a lot of the people who are looking to travel on those dates have already booked something. And so there's a high probability that your listing won't get rebooked. And even if it does get rebooked, it is probably going to be at a lower price because last minute pricing is generally lower than far out pricing if you use dynamic pricing, which you should. But all of this translates to some amount of lost revenue if you have too flexible of a policy. On the other hand, if you had a policy that is too strict, it deters people from booking in the first place. So how do you decide what cancellation policy would work best for your listing? First, let's talk about what's even available for cancellation policies on the major booking platforms. I made this table with the most flexible policies on the top, all the way down to the strictest policies towards the bottom. And as you can see here, between the three major booking platforms, there are a lot of little nuances and there are no two policies that are actually the same. Starting from the top, the most flexible option is on booking.com, where you can cancel even up to a specific clock time on the day of check-in without any cancellation fee. Now, this is not available on Airbnb or VRBO, and honestly, I'm not sure why you would pick this as a host or why you would need this as a guest. Slightly stricter than that is the flexible policy on Airbnb, where guests can cancel up to 1 day prior to check-in, just not the day of. You can create a similar setting on booking.com, but no such option exists on VRBO. This flexible policy is what I used for the tiny house. After that is the moderate policy on Airbnb, where guests can cancel up to 5 days before check-in, and they would get a full refund. You can similarly do this on booking.com, but not VRBO. One step stricter is the relaxed option on VRBO, which is really interesting because the relaxed option on VRBO is stricter than Airbnb's moderate. And you can see how this gets kind of confusing when you're listing your place on multiple platforms. But here, guests can get 100% refund if they cancel 14 days before check-in and 50% refund for days 7 to 14, and then no refund for less than 7 days. There's no equivalent to this one on the other platforms. After this is the moderate option on VRBO. It is very similar to Firm on Airbnb, where guests can get a full refund for up to 30 days before check-in. And in the Airbnb version, if the booking was made less than 30 days prior to check-in, then there is a grace period of 48 hours after making the booking. Between 7 to 30 days for Airbnb and 14 to 30 days for VRBO, 50% refund is available, and then within 7 days, there's no refund for Airbnb, and within 14 days, there's no refund on VRBO. So moderate on VRBO is just a little bit stricter than Firm on Airbnb, and I know this gets really confusing. It's a lot of words, so stick with me. Next, there's a bit of divergence, and the following options are each strict in their own ways. So strict on Airbnb allows for only 48 hours after the booking for any kind of cancellation, and the check-in date has to be at least 14 days away for a full refund to occur. If the 48 hours has passed, then it would be a 50% refund up to 7 days before check-in. So in comparison to the previous Firm option, where it's days 7 to 30 for the 50% refund, this is basically 7 days to however early the guests are booking it, plus 48 hours of grace period. So it covers a much bigger stretch of time at the 50% refund range. This is the setting that I currently have for the beach house. VRBO, on the other hand, takes a different route to becoming more strict. So VRBO's Firm option allows for a full refund up to 60 days before check-in, and then there's a step down to 50% refund at days 30 to 60, and then no refund past 30 days. This is the closest to the strict setting on Airbnb platform, so I chose this for the beach house to kind of match them. And then for strict on VRBO, a refund can be made 60 days before check-in, but after the 60-day mark, there's no refund at all, and there's not like a 50% step down. And this is also the strictest number of days available on Booking.com. And unfortunately, Booking.com doesn't have a step down to 50% for X number of days, and then like 0 for Y number of days. So unfortunately, I have to pick the strictest option here for the Booking.com listing for the beach house. I hope you like this chart because I spent a lot of time making it. If you do, give me a thumbs up. That would really be a huge encouragement and help spread the video. I know that was a lot of fine print, so let's use an example. If someone makes a booking in July for my beach house for, say, Christmas break, then they're booking August, September. So they're booking 5 months ahead of time. On the Airbnb strict setting, they have 48 hours after they make that booking in July to change their mind. But from any time between July till the week before Christmas, they could cancel and get a 50% refund, and I would get 50% of the payout, obviously minus the cleaning fee. And then at 7 days leading up to the reservation check-in date, it would be 100% of the payout for me and 0% refund for the guest. Versus if they made that same booking on VRBO under their firm setting, which I find to be the closest match to Airbnb strict, they would be able to cancel all the way up to October, which is 2 months prior, and then they would have 50% refund between October and November, and then after mid to late November, there would be 0 refund. And so hopefully this example illustrates the big difference if your house is a bigger house and you tend to get bookings way in advance. There is a really big difference between the Airbnb settings and the VRBO settings in terms of those first few months that are farther than 60 days out from the check-in date. And then lastly, and we won't go into detail, there is the option to not have a cancellation policy at all, i.e. you don't get to cancel ever after a booking is made. This is available on VRBO and Booking.com and Airbnb. I think this is way too strict and probably not advisable for most situations. And then additionally, Airbnb also has a separate long-term stay cancellation policy section that overrides your normal cancellation policy. We won't go into detail here because that's more for medium-term rentals. So with all these options, how do you decide what data can you use? Well, the main metric to look at is the booking lead time for your listing and your market. Lead time is dependent on a few things. 1 is the type of market that you're in. 2 is property size. Generally, bigger properties have a longer lead time. And then 3, there's a consumer sentiment component. If people are more confident in the general market, are more willing to spend money, they tend to look a little farther out and be more willing to book something like a whole year in advance, for example. And then 4, seasonality. Certain months, certain holidays are more desirable and generally have longer lead times. So for me at the beach house, this tends to be either the summer months where people are coming to vacation, or around the holidays or around spring break. Those have the longer lead times. And with that overview, I want to dive into some data specifics. Where can you find this data to help you? So the first thing I want to show you is your market data on cancellation policies. Price Labs is what I use, but I would imagine the other companies have something similar if that's what you're used to. The first thing I do is make sure I am comparing it to similar sized properties. As I mentioned, larger properties tend to have a longer lead time, which makes sense, right? Like if you're traveling with a group, with your friends, with family, you probably need a little time to coordinate. So I would imagine that you plan a little farther in advance. So narrowing it down to 4 to 6 bedrooms. And you can quickly see for the last 365 days, the booking window is 35 days. Now this is the average. So that doesn't tell us the full story. So I would recommend you not stop there. What I like to do is scrolling down to look at the seasonality. So in this chart, we can see the median booking window and number of days. And it tends to fluctuate from the lowest point recently for September's 26 days to the highest, let's say, is it 55? Yep, 55 for the summertime and spring break. And then last holiday season was pretty high too, but this season is a little bit shorter window. And that more so reflects consumer sentiment, I think. And so knowing roughly the ranges with seasonality is helpful. Keep in mind, this is still the median. And so by definition, median is at the 50% mark. 50% of the bookings have a shorter lead time than this. and 50% of the bookings have a higher lead time than this. And so whether that range is 2 days to 100 versus, whatever other combination, you have to keep that in mind too. So this tells me the pattern of the seasonality. Moving on, the next graph that can give you some of this information is the future occupancy / bookings and cancellations. The black line here demonstrates the pickup within the past 30 days, meaning the bookings made within the past 30 days. Obviously, that can't be reflective of people's booking habits throughout the whole year. But as you can see, people in the last 30 days have booked for more immediate stays, as well as stays that are farther out. So I would say, roughly March and May till end of April, actually, there are people who are actively looking at these dates and booking. I'm recording this on November 30th. And so this is like almost 5 months out, right? So that is important to keep in mind. The next useful graph is this length of stay versus booking window. And I like to change this to not just occupied nights, but I want to see number of bookings by length of stay and booking window. Now let's orient you to the graph a little bit. So on this left-hand side on this graph, the y-axis is number of bookings versus the x-axis is the booking window. The higher the bar chart, the more number of bookings there are. In this graph, you can see the most number of bookings are made for the 1 to 2 month booking window. However, there are plenty of bookings on either side, right? It's a little bit like a bell curve, and you can see how the split of length of stay is according to how they fall on each side of the graph. And what do I mean by that? It would appear that the 1 to 2 day stays are more common on the left side of the graph, meaning with a shorter window of booking, versus on the other end, these are slightly longer stays. And they're not like month-long stays, it seems like. These are often, what's this peach color? 3 to 4 days being the most kind of common booking. And these are stays booked within the past 30 days. And I wish Price Labs actually has this on an annual basis, or if there's a way to see month by month how this whole graph trends, I would love that. But it's interesting to know that there are people booking 6+ months out for certain places, and there's like 30 bookings or so. There's a good bit of bookings that are over 2 months for sure. Another feature I wish this would have is the 75th percentile, where that cutoff is. Because in my mind, I'd like to make sure my cancellation policy captures about 75% / like a majority of bookings, not just at the median mark. Just eyeballing it without adding all the numbers manually, it looks like roughly 4 months is where that 75th percentile cutoff might be. And so this kind of goes back to my very common example that people would book several months in advance, and none of the VRBO policies quite cover that. They all allow full refund for cancellations for up to 2 months before check-in. And as you can see, at the 2-month mark, you have already missed out on this chunk up here for potential bookings and potential people who are traveling. And the other piece of that too is people who tend to book more in advance. A, they tend to be really nice guests, and B, the pricing tends to be a little more favorable for the host. So ideally, your policy would capture more than half of the folks who are looking. Now, the next graph on this side shows the number of bookings based on their length of stay. As you can see in this market, the 3 to 4 day range is really the most common length of stay. Most listings of this size actually have like a 3-night minimum, at least up to a certain point in their calendar. So for me as a host, if I'm hoping to get longer bookings, like at least 3 nights, then I can study this chart to figure out when people might actually book. And so I'd say somewhere in this light gray is the halfway point. Most of the 3 to 4 day bookings happen more than 2 months out. And so again, yeah, that goes back to my point. If I had a guest cancel within 60 days, as it would be on VRBO or Booking.com, I would have lost out on a good half of potential guests who want to stay for a longer stay. And looking at the 5 to 6 day, the 7 to 14, and all the other ones, the median point is roughly where that light gray chunk is. And so I think I can conclude that if I'd like to have longer weekends, 3 to 4 days at least, then at least half of that group of guests would book more than 2 months in advance. The last graph on a market dashboard that is helpful is the cancellation policy graph. So on this one, you can see the percentage of listings that are set at flexible, moderate, strict, or super strict and super strict 60. I didn't cover those in my initial chart because these two are invitation only on Airbnb. And so for most people, the maximum is strict. And from here, it looks like about 20% of listings and 20% of bookings are in the strict range. And the pink bar being higher than the red bar tells me that this isn't necessarily a deterrent for people choosing a listing to book. I am surprised that there are this many bookings and listings under flexible and moderate for this size of house. It shows their base nightly price, but I'm curious if Price Labs can add like how well do those listings do in terms of like their revenue in the past 365 days. That would be pretty cool to see. The last piece of the puzzle in terms of data is your own listing and your own metrics. So to go take a look at that, you can go to Airbnb on the hosting side and take a look at insights. Under conversion, there's a booking lead time, and this graph is only available on the web version, not on your phone. Let me change that range to be inclusive of every booking that we've ever had. So since we started in April, naturally our initial lead time is shorter because by definition, we haven't existed for that long. And as you can see, it kind of increases over time. And matching with the market lead time, November and December, we have a little bit longer lead time thus far. On average, our booking lead time is 24 days still. We do have quite a bit of last minute bookings, but that's also by nature of being a relatively new listing, only starting this year. So after looking at all this data, what's my conclusion? My summary is that A, in my market, for properties that are similar size to my beach house, there is a wide range of booking lead times, with the median roughly being in the 1 to 2 month range. However, if I split them up into bookings that are shorter, like less than 3 nights, versus bookings that are 4 nights or more, and the 4 nights or more are kind of what I would like to have more of. Those longer bookings tend to have a longer lead time, with half of them being over 2 months in advance, 4 months in advance. And so to optimize the likelihood that I would get a longer stay, obviously there's pricing, there's all these other strategies, but from a cancellation policy standpoint, it would make sense for me to keep my Airbnb policy at the strict level where guests only have that first 48 hours to cancel. And then there's the 50% refund up till 7 days. That seems the most suitable for my purposes. There is unfortunately not a similar cancellation policy on VRBO and Booking.com, and it would be amazing if they can add it. But for now, I basically have to choose the most equivalent item on their list and just kind of take the risk that a guest on those other platforms could cancel just 60 days out. The other piece of information that I got out of reviewing this data is that about 20% of the listings similar to mine in terms of size in my area have the strict cancellation policy on Airbnb, and that doesn't seem to be a deterrent to guests for booking. So it's reassuring to me in terms of choosing to continue that. Lastly, in comparing my listing metrics versus the market metrics, it seems to me that my listing does follow the general market trends. And so that is reassuring to me as I'm interpreting market data to know that that is likely generalizable and applicable to my own listing. So that's it on cancellation policies. If you're also kind of a nerd and you like looking at market data and analyzing it and figuring out how you can use that to improve your listing, feel free to check out this other video where I talk about the market data in my local beach house market and how I'm using that to adjust my pricing. One more thing, if you're planning to list on Airbnb, feel free to use the link I have below. I get connected as your superhost guide and I can help you answer any questions throughout the listing process and help review it if that's what you would like. I hope this video was helpful to you, and I will talk to you next time.